casually dressed and deep in conversation with me, Greg Chalmers. CDDC is sponsored by Pizza Daddy, Lanarkshire's #1 American-style pizza parlour. To stay up to date on new flavours and promotions, then get connected on the socials. The Instagram handle is @RealPizzaDaddy and the website is www.thepizzadaddy.co.uk. To see what we're getting up to here at Casually Dressed, then you can find us on Instagram with the handle @CDDC Podcast, and on Twitter it is @PodcastCDDC. Also, as you're watching this on YouTube, then please hit those like and subscribe buttons. And with me this evening is my co-host, as always, all the way from Northern Ireland, the very handsome Christopher Shields.
How's it going, my man? You alright?
I'm smashing. With us this evening as our guest is SNP Councillor and founder of Melting Scot Junaid Ashraf. How are you?
I'm doing well, boys. How are we today?
Fabulous, mate. Fabulous. Well, as good as you can be on a rainy... Today's Wednesday, isn't it? Wednesday. Yeah. Yeah. So, what about you, Christopher? You had a lovely day?
Yeah, it's been fast-paced. Let's just call it that, fast-paced.
Life in the fast
life
lane.
with two small children, my man. Life with two small children. It's a roller coaster.
And a wife, mate. You know, doing it on your own.
Oh yeah, of course. I've got a beautiful wife. Yeah. Love you. I'm not saying she doesn't listen to these anyway.
No,
she's literally gone on record and says, "No, I don't really listen to them. I hear about them enough." So
well, she listens to your pish on a daily basis anyway.
That's very true. Yeah, very true.
So, Junaid, how has your lockdown been? COVID and all that. How have you been getting on with it?
I think it's been a pretty decent experience for me compared to what it must have been for others. I mean, I'm glad everyone, obviously my family and things, everyone's been well, but it's given me the time to really work on some projects and things like that I've been interested in over the last few years. And just prior to the lockdown, I felt as if I was getting a little bit of a burnout from work and things like that. So for the first 3-4 weeks, I was really relaxing, just being forced to stay in the house. You couldn't do anything. Yeah. So I was having a good time with family. What about yourself, boys? How's it been?
Just been combing my hair. I'm hoping one day it'll turn out as lovely as yours.
Right. That also happened during lockdown, actually.
Jeez, oh man, I think more of mine fell out than grew. So, no, I've just so I'm a photographer. That's what I do for a living, and all my work has been postponed. So, so I've just basically kind of went on holiday, just in the house.
Yeah.
Start getting in trouble there, going on holiday.
No, so I actually decided that lockdown, well, prior to lockdown would be a perfect time to relocate my family to Northern Ireland. So literally got unpacked the day we got put into lockdown, which was ideal. So it's been a real barrel of laughs for me, mate. It's just one of those things. We're in the process of buying a house and I'm in the middle of a corona, in the middle of a global pandemic. It's just not ideal, mate.
Nah,
but
it's not.
Yeah,
it's not.
I'm just I'm at the point now where I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think that's kind of that's my lane right now. So,
yeah, you can tell Chris is like that because that's the most amount of facial hair he's had in about 20 years.
Easily, yeah, and it's still pretty poor effort.
So. I know, mate. It's like it's scared to come out. It's just
this is my now. I've now made a bit of a life change. I can grow a beard, but I actually can't grow a beard. So it's kind of.
Sinead, why don't you just cut? Can you give him some of your offcuts?
I just go if you need some tips, I'll let you know, right? But I mean, it's not a lie, the whole coconut oil and stuff like that. But something I found really odd that I've been seeing a lot more lately on my Instagram ads and stuff like that. You seen that little roller thing?
He bought one.
Does it work?
Actually. No, you know, the thing is I bought one, but what I'm also terrible at doing is actually creating a new habit. So I've got one, and it's basically I've used it for a little bit, and it squeaked a bit, which annoyed me. So right, and then I just put it down. I kind of didn't really use it. So, I'll be honest, it's like I was like, right, this is annoying. I'll put that down. And I basically now I don't know where it is. So.
Right, gentlemen, let's try and get off a sort of male grooming and all that.
Let's get off of my beard failures.
I'm definitely getting jealous of the David Ginola hair lookalike underneath of the room, man. I swear to God, man, it's like looking at a L'Oreal advert every time he does that. Right, anyway. So, Junaid, for anyone who is listening to this and doesn't know who you are and what you're all about, why don't you give us a brief introduction?
All right, will do. Yeah, so my name is Junaid, which was already given. I'm a councillor for the Scottish National Party. I was elected in 2017 at the age of 20 years old, so I was one of the youngest in the country. So in my party, I was the third youngest. This was done whilst I was still at university, so I was still studying mechanical engineering. So I actually was, studying full time and also working full time for like a while. And I've got like a wide range of experience across the world, having been to represented Scotland in the United States and Rwanda and Belgium, obviously European Parliament. And I've been to Tanzania, Morocco, Montenegro, Bosnia, and all these other countries across the world in different advocacy programs. So my work has been primarily within politics and advocacy work. And more recently, I've been I launched the Melting Scot as a platform for ethnic minority Scottish people, not only just young people of all ages, to kind of give their views and opinions about how they feel about living in Scotland and their stories above and beyond just being like a diversity statement. So life has been going well so far, and for those who have known me through my politics and things like that, I think they've known me to be somebody who's quite open and understanding in approaching my politics, and glad to talk to you guys through. But any questions you might have today?
Do you know what? That was beautiful. It was like poetry. I was just listening to it and going, go on, son. I love that. So you mentioned Melting Scot, right? Could you tell us what the initial inspiration was? Like, what was the spark that made you think, do you know what, I need to do this?
Yeah. So when I was I don't know how far back it goes for me. In terms, perhaps when I was about 14 or 15, right? My dad basically told me there's something called the Scottish Youth Parliament. Go figure out what it's about. And then I didn't do it for a few months, and then got yelled at, and then I went and figured out what it was. And I got involved in this organisation. And when I got involved, I was only one of very few ethnic minority young people. This whole story about how I got involved. And that was my first step in politics. And then from about 14 to about 20, when I got elected, there was a lot I got involved with. Quite often, I was the only ethnic minority person involved. So I always felt as if people kind of didn't really understand my experience or my background. Everything I did was always, the first person to do, or groundbreaking, or there wasn't that many people involved. And I've tried as I've progressed, to get more people involved, because representation matters. I mean, it definitely does in all levels of society. But I found it quite difficult to get people involved because I've had the background and experience and the support for about 4, 5, 6 years through the youth parliament, through the local youth forum, through my high school and that sort of thing. So I eventually ended up with the idea of the Melting Scot to basically just let ethnic minority people just kind of get in the process of telling their story, because it's a very long, hard struggle within Scotland that people really, really aren't that involved within politics at all if you're from an ethnic minority background, to the extent that people don't think that they have a story to tell. They don't think that their experience is unique. And I thought this is perhaps the first level to getting people involved, is just to tell them their story and how their perspective, and then from there they can figure out how they can change things. That's basically where it came from. I just wanted to launch something, see what would happen. And over time, I found other people, brought them onto my team, and we're starting on this whole experience. And it's been fantastic. I think within 4 months, we had something like 40 contributors making 50 stories, and 20 people doing these lockdown stories. So we did these lockdown vlogs as well. So 20 people did lockdown vlogs, about 5 minutes each, speaking about what they were doing during lockdown and just giving advice to other people. I mean, it really did take off quite easily, quite well. And we're looking to obviously work with other groups and things like that now. Yeah, so I mean, what do you guys think?
That's something that, I mean, I take it that you must have been the first person to kind of create that environment for people to express themselves in such a manner.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I don't actually think there's anything. Something I got told quite a lot is that this is something that I feel should have already been a thing.
Yeah.
And now that it's been created, it's like, well, just run with it. I mean, it seems to be a platform that should have already been there. But I guess this is what's perhaps quite jarring about the Scottish environment is very, very positive living within Scotland, but the diversity within the narrative being put out in Instagram or like social media or within the media as a whole or within the third sector, it's not very diverse at all. It's not very inclusive at all. So, for example, if you are, let me give you a random example. If you are a person who is, I mean, you play the flute, you play the clarinet, you play the bagpipes or whatever. I mean, like, and you're from an ethnic minority background, you will be like the only person that comes from like that background within your band, within your school, whatever. And or if you're looking to get involved in a field which isn't specifically usually related to perhaps a majority, say Asian, Pakistani, that sort of thing. So you're an Asian girl, you're studying politics at Glasgow University. You're more than likely to be the only person from your background within your class. Yeah. And it's a perspective that whilst you're in that environment, you are seen to be somebody that's different. You bring in a new perspective, whatever. But that's the only perspective you're ever seen. And usually, you just feel very lonely, and you don't feel as if your opinion is respected. So this was about empowering that perspective, but so people can stand from a point of professionalism or point of like not professionalism, from point of. It's hard being somebody who's very good at what they do, but then only being seen through the narrative of being the ethnic minority that's in the room doing it. And that's the narrative that I've kind of felt. I've not felt that in politics. I'm not actually going to say I've come out and say I haven't felt that. Sometimes people are saying that you're encouraging and you're becoming a role model for others, which is fine, fair enough, right? But it's definitely the perspective I know a lot of other people feel. And this was just a place to tell them that, you know what, we just want to hear what you're saying, but you don't need to say, you know, as a young Indian girl or as a, you know, Nigerian man or something like that. I think about this platform, you just say what you need to say, and the people who are going to read your views and opinions and your stories also come from the similar background that you do, that they're living in Scotland, they're from an ethnic minority background, and they will see you excelling in what you're doing, and they will appreciate you for the experience you're going through, because everyone else here is going through the same experience.
Yeah. Did you find that when you started it that it was that it felt almost like somebody had opened the floodgates on all these unheard voices beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, it's not even floodgates. It was more like it felt more like a not a spider web, but like suddenly all these random people who just weren't connected were suddenly connected.
Yeah.
Because even within my network, I know quite a lot of people who are involved in pretty strange stuff, right? You know, all legal, but all pretty strange stuff, right? So, but it was interesting. Like, for example, there's a girl I know, right? And basically, I won't tell you like how I know, because she wanted to stay anonymous for the post that she'd written. But basically, she'd said that she'd felt this way about, and it's on the Melting Scot website. It's one of our longest contributions. We usually try to keep about 500 words, but she wrote about 2,000. I was like, fine, run on. And she was basically speaking about the perspective of the fact that she'd never really felt comfortable amongst her friends. She's I think she just says Asian girl in her post that she makes, and she's just felt as if from Muslim background as well. She's just the female friends and stuff that she'd been mates with, they get involved in stuff that obviously her family and stuff like that, and other different people probably don't get that involved with. So like drinking, going out partying, that sort of thing. Yeah. But she's very close friends with them. And she said she's never really felt like very close to perhaps the Muslim community of girls and things like that. And basically the way she'd written it is saying that she doesn't have any sort of like ill feeling. She just thinks she's never felt comfortable. And she says, it's not that I miss, you know, that sort of connection, or I wish I had it. It says, I just don't feel as if it feels like it's a weird thing for me, but I don't know why I think it's weird. I don't feel as if I should be with my own as such. And she's just something that's been going on in her head.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, cool, put it on paper, put it out. And then there was another girl that got in touch, basically wrote another piece that was similar, who came, I think at least anyway, the experience that she'd kind of written, but she was saying that she grew up mixed race. So her mum's Bangladeshi, I think her dad's Scottish white. And she was just kind of saying that she'd never felt as if she was like white Scottish enough for her friends, but didn't feel as if she was like Bangladeshi enough for like her other mates. So she didn't understand her culture and her background and things like that as much because it hadn't been taught to her. But then she didn't feel as if she felt comfortable with it. And it felt as if two different experiences, and they'd read both their different stories, and they got in touch, and other people were messaging the page saying, "Oh, I felt the same way." And it's strange though, because it took so much encouragement for the girl who came forward anonymously to get her to write it. And off the back of it, there were so many people just getting in touch saying, like, I really feel the same way. I really understand the perspective. And it took me about like a week or two to try and encourage her to write it. And she was like, "Oh, it's really badly written, whatever." And I read it, and it was amazing. And it's about that little bit of encouragement and just support that I think a lot of people need, that a lot of people wouldn't really give to people of the backgrounds that some of our contributors come from, because they just feel as if it's not really a story. People feel as if it's not a story worth telling, but I definitely think it is, and I think it would definitely help a lot more other people to really understand the diversity in opinion within the ethnic minority community. We're not just one big block, you know. We're a lot of voices.
Yeah, very much so.
Absolutely. I think it's. I think as well, like, see, things like this, as we're quite similar in terms of this podcast, in that this has been one of the kind of like little positives of being in lockdown. It's allowed people to kind of have these little bits have this bit of time to kind of reflect and be able to put things like this out there. Because I mean, like you say, this is like something like Melting Scot is, like you said, it's something that we feel should have been in place. Of course, it should have been in place but it hasn't been. And then it's allowed you to kind of invest a bit of time and to be able to coax that story out of somebody. Whereas, like you said, like before, we were all just in an absolute burnout. I mean, we were just going a million miles an hour, just going, what's next? But in actual having that ability to stop and kind of have like a kind of collective condor moment and have a little look about us and go, right, no, wait a minute, like this project, whilst it's a good idea, this needs to be done. I mean, because there've been plenty of projects we've sat and talked about this podcast for the ages. And then actually having something like this has given us time to go, right, let's get this done and get this over the line. And here we are, 30 odd episodes in. So
See, I think as well, this is all about educating people, innit? Ultimately. And I sound like a broken record because I say this all the time. See things like Melting Scot, or even our podcast, however small and insignificant it may be, it's all about just people communicating shared experiences, because ultimately we're all just folk trying to meander our way through the river of life, as it were. That was a bit Lion King.
I wonder where you're going there. I seen him sticking. I was like, where's he going?
The reason I went with river was because sometimes the waters are turbulent and sometimes it's plain sailing, right? That's why I went with river. Listen, don't doubt me, son. Right, anyway.
There's a poet in the chat.
No. Well, maybe not. But ultimately we're all just trying to kind of get on in life and do our own thing. And I think what you were saying beforehand about some people who maybe don't want to, who ordinarily wouldn't put something out there, are saying, right, well, and then they take the chance on it. But them taking the chance on it, they think they've just got an experience that's individual to them, and then they realise once they've kind of opened that door that there's other people at the other side of it who are going, oh, I'm the exact same. And then in itself, a community builds. And before you know it, you've got hundreds of pals. I think it's a fantastic thing. Actually, do you know, I'm going to kind of shift focus a wee bit on you, because we were talking, I don't know if you happened to watch or listen to the episode we did with Florence and Madeline Joseph. They wrote the letter to the Scottish Parliament for reparation in education. And I actually saw on your Instagram that you had seconded a motion for anti-racist education sort of stuff, and it kind of dovetailed a wee bit with what they were saying. So can you give us a wee bit more information about that and how it would be implemented in specifically in North Lanarkshire?
Yeah, so basically the reparations in education sort of work that the Josephs were working on was extremely amazing, like the petition things they'd come out with. So I'd been in touch with them as well and discussed with them what else they could do with the campaign. This was a separate sort of piece of work that had been going on, that my older brother's actually a councillor as well, which is something which is quite interesting when I'll get onto that later as to why it's
Yeah,
going
man.
stuff.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Basically,
Don't share the spotlight. Don't share the spotlight, mate.
Stay tuned, folks.
But basically, my brother had been working on this piece of work to do with anti-racist education, and within we represent North Lanarkshire Council, so he's in Cumbernauld North, I'm in Cumbernauld South. So he'd been working on this. I was happy to second him on this motion, and basically this is to do with implementing anti-racist education across North Lanarkshire. So what that means in practice is, firstly, teaching a lot more about the transatlantic slave trade in schools. To teach about the historical significance of Britain's past, also to teach obviously about the colonial past. So, for example, about India, the British India, and for about 200 years or so. Also, where my past came from. My grandparents came to this country in the 1950s after partition when they created Pakistan, and the sort of history that I come from. There's a whole story behind that if you want to go into it. And then there's also to look into specifically teaching anti-racist sort of like education to the teachers in terms of how to deal with racism, because at this point in time it's not given the sort of due importance in schools, that if there's like a racist incident, it's just kind of seen as like a little bit of teasing or something like that. Sometimes that's sort of been the sort of experience of a lot of young people and other teachers, that it's not really given that much importance. So transatlantic slave trade, post-colonial sort of like past, and also to teach teachers how to deal with racism within schools are the three aspects they're looking into. And there's a number of people that would be involved in that process in implementing it. So in terms of implementation afterwards, it's there will be a group created within North Lanarkshire Council. So it actually passed with the Labour Party supporting it. Obviously the SNP, we were proposing it, we supported it. The Conservatives put through an amendment and was refusing to support it because, according to them, we were trying to paint a cruel picture, or basically I just felt as if they were getting a bit they were basically just feeling a bit affronted that we were trying to show like the real face of the British Empire. And it's not, the motion wasn't written in a way to basically make Britain look bad. It wasn't written in a way to make our country look bad. I'm Scottish, everyone else on that call Scottish, everybody's proud to be part of this nation. And they were just taking it as an affront that, why you try to make us look bad, sort of thing. They said we should talk about the fact that we ended slavery. I'm like, that's not even like historically like correct if you look at it in like a objective manner. But I went off a bit of topic there, but basically
but did Scotland not abolish slavery? Was it 1758? No, it wasn't quite as early as that. But there was also, but the whole of Britain didn't do it until the start of the 1800s or something,
I thought, see, for me to think though, like that,
I think
like you're saying stuff like that, it's.
Yeah, we should know these dates basically. Like we should know these dates off the top of our head.
You're right. We absolutely should, but it's the whole kind of the whole stiff upper lip. Let's Great Britain. One thing's great back then. Like, well, no, we're the good guys. You go, wait a minute, we're not completely.
We've got great in the name of the bloody country, man. Right? We all know we love it, right? We're loving ourselves. We're not mediocre Britain. Do you know what I mean?
But it's you're just kind of going like it's just have the humility to kind of acknowledge that things things don't age well. I mean, guess what? People's actions back then, they're not great. Oh no, they've done some questionable things. I mean, so let's just accept it, acknowledge it, and then actually tell people about it. So then, I don't know, maybe we could learn something and move forward from it. I mean, it seems simple. Oh no, let's just plant this flag here. Weren't we fantastic, by the way?
Do you know? I didn't realise. But so when Chris told me you were coming on, Junaid, I kind of started doing a wee bit of research on it. And I didn't really realise how involved North Lanarkshire was in the slave trade. Like, I didn't realise, like, it was wild, man. Like, tobacco and the full 9 yards. It was mental. There was a thing, I read an article, and it was basically like they were like describing the attributes of some African guy, but there was no name and stuff like that, and they like showed the document. It's harrowing, man. But I know, like, because we come from Helensburgh, and down our neck of the woods, there's like in Rue, there's all these big, massive old houses, and they were the residences of the merchants on the Clyde. So there's a bit of that history down here, but I just didn't realise how ingrained it was over in North Lanarkshire, Cumbernauld and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it was across like the whole of society. I mean, people talk about it as if it's something that was going on, like something somewhere else. But I mean, in terms of the perspective of the why people don't want to talk about it and things like that, you know, just kind of put their head in the sand and just say, you know, we were fantastic, we were great, things were better back then. And it's like, you really don't understand to an extent, and neither do I, to an extent, but for the stuff that I do know, I mean, for the very little that I do know, it's absolutely shocking and harrowing, and it's just like, if that's the word, right? It's just in terms of the actions of the British Empire just going around colonizing the entirety of the earth. I think my brother was saying during his speech, in terms of, I think there's something like the entirety of the whole world, there's only something like 27 nations in the world right now that wasn't conquered by Britain, something like that. I mean, I was something along those lines.
That's middle one.
I mean, I was like, all right, mate. But
get in the boats, let's go.
I don't know, but I mean, there was shocking. I was listening to this a podcast as well about the specifics. So for something that's interesting to me is the obviously as a representative of the Scottish National Party, obviously we're very pro-independent, right? We also like speak about Scotland's perspective in the UK, and just kind of like how we were treated by the English in our past, etc. And it's like, I get all that, but when you look at the history of Scotland within the British Empire as well, it's completely like disgusting as well, like in terms of the role we had to play. For example, in I was reading Shashi Tharoor's book on the Inglorious Empire, and he says within there that although Scotland only made up 9% of the population during the period where Britain had colonized India, you know, through the East Indian Company, took over the Indian subcontinent. We only made up 9% of the population here. We actually made up 25% of the senior officers and officers within India. So Scotland disproportionately benefited from being in the British Empire. Mm-hmm. But that's not a perspective we very much hear within the independence movement and things like that, because we are very positive in terms of obviously Scotland's role and what's happened to us with the English and things like that within our party and movement. And I actually believe that there should be a lot more discussion in terms of Scotland's role and past out with obviously just our relationship with England. Like, you know, what was our role in the British Empire further to that? I was listening to a podcast by a woman called Afua Hirsch, and she was speaking about to someone about in crossing East Africa, I think just off of like Madagascar and things like that. There was a guy who went on this expedition, and he found this old castle, and people weren't too sure why it was there and that sort of thing. And through his research, he discovered like a whole island that was apparently very, very crucial to aspects of the slave trade, bringing people across. And there was just the way that it was built. They were looking at it, and they found documents there, and they found like huge ships just lying there. It turns out that because of its placement between there and like East Africa, people would have brought slaves there and auctioned them off and things like that. And there was something really weird about the place, is that it had like for the time period that they were sure that they had it for, is that it had a golf course there. And from that, they discovered that the people there had actually, because obviously golf is obviously a Scottish sport, and they figured out that golf had actually made it from Scotland to East Africa before before golf had been a thing in England, because of the fact that there was such rich Scottish people involved in the slave trade that they'd made it to East Africa. They'd obviously set up camp there. They were selling slaves. They were involved in this process, and obviously they wanted a golf course there, so they built a golf course there. So golf actually made it to East Africa, according to our podcast, before it even made it to England.
Jeez, man!
It was such weird stuff like this that you just hearing like what does this even mean? Like, I don't know. It's just like, I don't
know whether to be proud or not. Like,
I mean, exactly right. It's things like that you hear, and it's like, it's an interesting debate to have had, for example, on that council debate, because I'm completely in agreement with the Conservative Party when I tell them we should learn more about our history. Like, I'm 100% on the same page with you, bro. Like, we should learn more. I'm happy for you to make 100% of the syllabus about learning about what Britain did and how we conquered the world and the British Empire. But I don't think you're going to be too happy about your end result there, mate. It's
no, exactly. Yeah, well, that's it. Like their version is, well, let's like we're all these big dashing conquerors, and off we went, and we went there, and boom, and taught these. Look at these kind of mongrel people. Look at them. We've taught them the Queen's English. Look at our fine crockery. You can't have any, but look.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Exactly. But I mean, I think that it's interesting is the what the Josephs were doing in terms of like, the reparations in education, and there's also like the way that they call it decolonizing the education at times, because some people will be like, we do learn about our past. What's wrong with it? So when I was doing my speech, I actually took a different perspective to my brother. So he took the very strong approach in terms of speaking about what Winston Churchill did. He spoke about the transatlantic slave trade. He spoke about the number of slaves that there were. He spoke about things that are obviously very, very shameful to talk about and think about. I went on a somewhat pseudo-positive sort of like note, and speaking about the contribution of Commonwealth countries to Britain, which they say contribution, but that's also just a questionable. Like, for example, in World War One, there were about 1.2 million Indian soldiers as part of the British Army.
Yeah.
And you hear a number like that, and you're like, okay, cool, whatever, 1.2 million. No, think about that for a minute, right? In the British Army, there were 1 million. Think about that number: 1,200,000 Indian men. It would have been men, so Indian men. Yeah. In the British Army fighting like front lines, like, doing that sort of thing. There's 5 million people in Scotland right now.
To put that in perspective as well, the British Army at the moment is at about 80,000.
What?
It's like 80 to 90,000 people.
You're kidding me on.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 79,999 because you just ran away.
I've left. I've just left.
Is that what you're crossing Ireland?
He just did a bunky lap, see well.
But I mean, 1,200,000 like soldiers, and they say that I think it was about 149 million pound, I think it was given from India to the British Army to support the World War One during the whole effort. Things like, apparently the equivalent of that money in today's money is something in the region of about 50 billion pound.
Huh?
With a B. Because people be like, well, no, that's an extortionate amount of money. Clearly, you're just like messing around with money. But think about it was a world war that went on, right? So, yeah. I mean, the extortionate is actually the terms that you should be using. Right? Like, it did cost that much. Imagine any nation gave another nation 50 billion pound and 1.2 million men to fight a war that literally had nothing to do with them.
like miles away from it.
Yeah,
literally.
I mean, this whole perspective that it was a world war, when you consider it's Europe. I mean, there's a whole other part of the.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine being one of those guys going? I'm going where?
Well,
right. All right. Okay. Right. I'll be back for Christmas. So yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. So they talk about this. So, for example, like when you're in high school and you're in primary school, you learn about World War One. You learn that it was trenches. You learn something about Franz Ferdinand, something or another, right? Something happened, and you learn about things like, for example, what did they eat in the trenches? How would they have lived? That sort of thing. Why none of this is brought up as part of the narrative in terms of, and this is crucial here. People will be like, as to what's important about this is that after World War II as well, is basically that's when obviously the country had been devastated and that sort of thing, and basically Britain wasn't in a place to maintain places like India as colonial rule anymore. Mm-hmm. So what happened after that is that they broke up the nation, divide and conquer. I mean, if we can't have India, it might as well slash its face or something like that, or it's a bit harsh, like in terms of what happened there, in terms of over 200 years instigating, differences between religious groups, really creating caste sort of structures and things like that, really doubling down on them, starting stuff like colorism. I mean, you're talking about things like, for example, things that weren't issues before, according to stuff I've read and listened about, to do with, for example, even, homophobia and sexuality, to things like that, within Hindu texts and culture and religion, things like that. I mean, things like this are very fluid already in the past. But now you go to places like India and Pakistan, things like that, and these things are viewed a lot more harshly. And people are like, oh, it must be to do with religious intolerance. People in Pakistan must be like that. People in India must be like that. These things were started and instigated because of the very Christian British perspective that was brought over to India, instigated there, pushed on and forced onto the nation there for 200 years. and then people left, and these sort of issues that were completely, I mean, to an extent, even ingrained into law. There was a few cases I was looking into recently. Forgotten what point it is. I'm just going off on one, but basically, it's to do with all of what's happened there isn't really discussed. And what happened after World War II is basically the country was devastated. They couldn't look after they couldn't maintain control there. And basically, they brought over, like a lot of people from India and Pakistan were brought over to Scotland and the UK to rebuild the nation. So, for example, my grandparents from my mum's side, so my grandfather, he came over to this country to rebuild the nation. So they had to do jobs that they needed people to do, like, like bus drivers and, just anything else that they had available. So that's actually how, obviously, my direct lineage obviously ended up in this country, is through my mum's parents who came here. Then they had 7 kids, and those 7 kids between them had 35 kids, like 5 kids each. So I got 31st cousins on my mum's side that live in Glasgow. Right.
Wow,
so
man.
We came and we settled, right? but
Got real comfy.
Get real comfy. I quite like it. It's a bit chilly here. All right.
Not bad here.
You've only got to worry about the midges, no of any Bengal tigers or anything like that. That's incredible, man. So see when your grandparents came over, how did they find the adjustment?
So quite interesting is that started eating one of the raspberry cakes. I mean, this is the sort of reason you stay in Scotland for, right?
I know, man. I know. That's good.
So eating raspberry cake. So basically, my grandfather, he passed away in 2004. So I was only about 8 years old, so I didn't know him that well. And also my grandfather from my dad's side also passed away pretty soon to that as well. Didn't really have like the whole grandfather figure in my life, but my gran lived till about 2014 as well. But there was a little bit of a language barrier between me and her. Like, she only really spoke Urdu, and my Urdu is awful, like my native tongue. So I mean, this whole story behind that as well, like you can go into. But having spoken to my older cousins who had a much closer relationship with them, with both of them, she came over when she came. So basically, my grandfather came over first, and then afterwards came my gran on a boat, like all the way across. So it took 3 months to get from Pakistan to get to Scotland. So she traveled the world, like she went all across, obviously, so the whole of Africa, just on every single port on the way up and then all the way round before coming here. And also she was in her, I'm assuming it was early 20s, things like that, maybe late 20s. Sorry, no, not the late 20s, early 20s, maybe late teens, to come settle here. And also with grandfathers here, they talk about the shops and stuff that they had, and also like I think was involved in bus driving, things like that, earlier on. And then a bunch of other family came over. So obviously between them said, like, obviously they had 7 kids. So I think 1 or 2 of my aunts may have went to college/university and things like that. So and also my mum has 4 sisters, 2 brothers, so they got involved in different businesses and things like that. And so from my uncles and my aunts, I get a better perspective as to how living in Scotland was like. Having grown up obviously here in the 70s and things like that, obviously 60s and 70s. And obviously I wasn't like it's a strange sort of thing especially when I speak to my uncles about it, about how growing up in Scotland, like, they tell me about the funny stories and things, well, stuff they find funny, about obviously just kind of how they were treated in Scotland. Like, they're just very, very Scottish Glaswegian like lads. It's scary, but they laugh about it though, in terms, because obviously when you grow up in an environment like that, so they speak about, going down Mary Hill and just getting abuse, but there was like at least 2 or 3 of them, and just kind of, it's a funny thing now to be yelled at like that and square up to them, and then they have like a funny story out of it, or just stupid things they used to do. But it's definitely not the experience of like me growing up, and it's definitely not the experience I would want us to end up going back towards. That was a really long answer to a question you didn't ask, right? But
that's all right. Listen. I'm taking in. I'm just listening. You just go, just keep talking about it.
Well, the stuff that's quite interesting that I find funny though is basically like, for example, my gran, I was told she came about the same time as the coronation of the Queen. One of my cousins told me that. I don't know if that's true or not, but apparently my gran was a very big fan of Queen Elizabeth. Obviously, all the diamonds and all this jewelry and all this, pompousness and all that sort of thing, all the grandeur. And because of that, my my mum and my obviously my aunts and stuff like that are all part of that whole generation of like the whole Princess Diana and things like that. So they're all very big fans of the royal family because I think she came about the same time.
Right. Okay.
But obviously now I'm involved in politics stuff like that. A lot of people in my party aren't very fond of the royal family.
No.
But also I can't speak. This is why I don't really have an opinion on it, because I don't really want to disagree with my mum and my gran and things like that.
You got to pick your battles, man. Pick your battles.
Yeah. But I mean, I think there's a lot of things that I find interesting. So to get to like a more serious point that I guess I can speak to you guys about, that I reflect on. Going back to the Melting Scot thing, let me explain the Melting Scot thing. That'll take me like a good 2 minutes, right? And then I'll come back to this point, right?
Right, okay, cool.
It's an interesting setup. It's an interesting setup because this is how my mind works in terms of the politics for the nuance. So basically, the Melting Scot, the name, where it came from, right? So basically, there's, I don't know if you're aware, there's two different types of like ways that people look at society. There's the melting pot, or there's the mosaic, or like, salad bowl, they call it. So there's two different types. So a mosaic is obviously what a mosaic is. It looks like, tiny little tiles. They're all little colorful things, from the Roman, empire, whatever. And then you have these tiny little colored tiles, and then you stand back, and then it makes a picture, right?
Yes.
And people, basically the perspective people put with that is that everybody's allowed their individuality within their square tiles, the different colors, they add to, and then when you stand back, that's what society is. It's all colorful, it makes a nice picture, etc., whatever. It looks nice. But people can hold on to the individuality. So you can be Scottish Pakistani, you can be Scottish whatever, that sort of thing. People say the melting pot is kind of like, obviously, they describe it as an aspect of like assimilation and things like that. So they say, which is obviously like used to describe a little bit more in America. For example, you see like migrants who are Italian who went there. They're American now, maybe they're American Italian or whatever, but obviously they're just like, they're American. Everybody says they're American. Everybody says that, nobody says that they're stuff like, you might ask them about their background, things like that. And it feels as if like, you all try to force yourself into like a box that's kind of like the melting pot thing. This is, you shove in everything, you mix it up, really heat it up, and then it just comes with this sludge sort of thing. Everybody's the same. You're all American. You don't have any individuality. You need to kind of go under that same narrative. My perspective, I actually believe that there could be a third option, right? So this is where the whole Melting Scot thing comes from. Okay. Is that we have this whole perspective within, which is pushed quite a lot, obviously, by Nicola Sturgeon as well, in my party, about positivity, civic nationalism. We're all Scottish. Everybody who comes here, we welcome them as a Scot if you make this your home. I think that's very positive. Like, I actually do. I think it's an amazing perspective to have. I have a lot of friends who are international students. They love, like, when they came here, they absolutely fall in love with the country. The issue I have, though, with this whole narrative is to do with 10 minutes into the conversation, a week into the conversation, whatever, somebody asks you at some point, where are you really from, right? And that's the aspect that I don't like, is to do with, if we were saying everybody's Scottish, we're saying everyone's, proud to be here, makes it their home, is Scottish, whatever, then why are we asking these questions? And I get it. You know what? There's no malice in it at all. No. Like, there isn't, like, nobody would ask, nobody's got any issue with that. There isn't. But it does, to an extent, put a level of othering onto people who want to be here as Scottish. For example, the perspective that my grandparents have been here since the 1950s. My parents my mum grew up in this country, and her all siblings all did it. I've got 30 cousins from my mum's side who all live and grew up in Scotland to Scottish parents. And then I was born after that, completely in Scotland and Scottish parents. And Cumbernauld, of all places, right? And still, I will be asked, where are you really from, or where's your background from? I've been in this country for family lineage for like 70 years, and I'm still getting asked that question. At what point am I just Scottish? If my kids are going to be Scottish and I live to see them, are they going to be asked where they're really from? Yeah. They're going to be a full 100 years having lived away from anything within east of this world and being asked, where are you really from? It's already ridiculous at this point. But this is the narrative that I'm trying to get through my organization. That this is the sort of conversation we need to have. Like, asking somebody where they're really from might just be a nice question to say, like, you know what, mate, it's cool. I just want to know, like, maybe, chapatis and stuff like that. Like, I get it, like, whatever. Just, what type of Scottish, what type of flavour are you? I get that, I get that. I 100% do. But harmful to the narrative in a wider scale is basically what I'm saying. When I'm trying to find a way to be able to describe this without it taking 10 minutes to explain it to someone.
I just love the chapatis and that. That fucking killed me.
It's
You killed him off. Man. You absolutely killed him off.
it's
It was just so flippant, man. Oh,
it's you know when you
sorry, Junaid. That absolutely killed me there.
right?
Oh.
So you get me right. You get me.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
Like there's no malice from my perspective. Like I'm not gonna. If somebody's gonna ask me where you're from, I'm not gonna start squaring up, right? But I mean, the point being is like there needs to be a conversation. When you said earlier in terms of there needs to be the platforms being used to educate. That's actually not what the platform's there for. The platform there is to empower ethnic minority people to just speak their own narrative without having to educate other people. However, the platform does in of itself end up educating people because of the stuff that comes out of it. That's the way I'd like to approach it. And I know that sounds like a lot of overthinking, but that's what goes on in my head, right? But so coming back to the main point about the grand aspect and things like that is that there's also this other conversation. Like there's a lot of things I don't agree with within mainstream sort of equalities talk within politics, within the third sector. That's really weird. Like for example, you know, this is another one. Quite often you hear things like there's more that brings us together than divides us, right? You hear this quite a bit, right? You hear this in your interfaith talks. You hear this after something, you know, tragic happens in the world, like, you know, some attack or something like that. And hear it quite often, right? I actually disagree with that being used. I don't actually think that's a positive statement at all. I think it's actually a very negative statement to say that there's more that brings us together than divides us. Because essentially, the premise of that argument is that there needs to be there needs to be more in common for us to respect each other than to divide us. I mean, what happens if we're nothing? What happens if we're nothing alike? If we're nothing alike, am I not deserving of your respect?
Yeah, that's
and fair. I believe that that's an issue because when the premise of that argument is spun as something as positive like that, then when we cease to be in common with each other, then, you know, tensions start to rise. And it's not because of the group that's seen as that's seen as the other. It's not their fault. It's because of the narrative that's being pushed that you should respect people that are kind of like you. So going back to all of this, is like, for example, going back to all this, I'll bring you all the way back to my gran, basically.
Okay.
And I think I don't know. For me, I think it's a pretty baller move, right? But basically, right? But you may not agree, right? You may not agree. That's probably not the way I should describe it, right?
My gran's a baller.
But my gran lived in this country for the entirety of her life, up until obviously they passed away 2014. Came in the 1950s at some point, I believe, and she didn't learn English. Like she lived in this country for 64, 70 years.
That's
and didn't learn English.
That's a punchy move.
Not at all. Not at all.
No, I mean she didn't. No.
So her daily life mustn't have been that easy. You know.
No, I mean.
But she didn't talk to anybody ever. She was also a full-time mute. No, because this is the thing, is that people refuse to put the context of her experience and the experience of my grandfather and my uncles and things like that in the perspective that it needs to be appreciated in, which is, you're talking about the 1950s and the 1960s. It was not all peaches and roses or nothing like that. There were signs up in doors in the UK as well. Like you hear about stuff in America quite often, so you're not taught about these things in here. But I mean, was it that they used to have on doors? No blacks, no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Jesus, oh man.
I mean, that's the context that she lived here in this country. I mean, and people say, oh, but why can't you just interact with other people? Take some English learning classes. Do you think people were teaching English to people when they didn't even want them in the country?
That's very true,
right,
man.
Yeah. And you're talking about migrants coming to this country, like my grandfather and things like that. And they were working relatively menial jobs, doing menial tasks and things like that, and their interaction with the public wasn't positive either. You know, you weren't getting treated with the utmost respect on the lowest wages that were possibly able to be contracted in, from having just newly came from a country that was colonized by Britain for 200 years, and then they brought folk over because they wanted to put them in low-level jobs and basically just continue the legacy of the British Empire through using these people who were in the most poorest of conditions in the whole world.
Well, that's it, yeah, and then telling these people that they're all, you're part of the British Commonwealth. You guys are all British citizens. Come on over, come and welcome over to the motherland, sort of stuff. And then, actually, when you get here,
you're treated like a second class.
You are,
citizen.
but you're not really. I mean, like that sort of like it's exactly a similar sort of idea to kind of the Windrush generations, really, isn't it? It's the same, similar sort of thing. But it's you're right. It's ridiculous. Like, it's a strong move just to be like, well, actually, now you know what. I'm not going to learn your language.
Well, I mean, that's not why she didn't learn, right?
No, of course not.
Movement, like,
but hey, it's just like
standing at the window,
just going.
I love that. It's your grand, just
very Glaswegian as well.
That is very that in itself. Is
very, very Glaswegian. So she's in the perfect place. You know what I mean?
I think you should really tell, obviously, the podcast listeners the signs you were making while saying those statements.
Audio
description
still
in the
only
back.
30 episodes in. We're still learning.
Still
I just realised that I've just amazed for people that weren't listening.
You've been putting signs up for about 3 minutes straight and just nobody's laughing at it. These guys are just laughing.
Do you know what, I think what you were saying there, like when your grandparents came over in the 50s and 60s, that must have been horrific. You know, just thinking about, because Chris, we've had this conversation before, that we have a very narrow perspective on all this sort of stuff because we are Scottish white dudes, right? We don't have these problems on our front door. Do you know what I mean? We've never had to deal with stuff like that. And I think for you to become the person that you are just now, open-minded, educated, part of the Scottish National Party, for crying out loud, right? Okay, and having known the struggles that your grandparents went through, that must take a lot of strength. And whereas you could have grown up and been pretty bloody bitter about the whole thing and been like, do you know what? Sod a lot of yous. I'm speaking Urdu, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it's interesting. But it's like so basically, my so I've got 3 older siblings. So sister, then 2 brothers above me, and then I got a younger brother. So my sister and my eldest brother, Urdu, Punjabi, good, like working order, it's working. You know, brother above me, it's you know, he can get by-ish in like a conversation. Like you meet somebody in the street, you need to get somewhere, show them directions, that sort of thing. You know, intermediate level. Comes to me, just dies. Like there's nothing going on there.
Did a bit of French at school.
Which is kind of sad, right? Because I feel like a strong affinity towards I mean, people ask you like how you identify yourself, and I identify as being Scottish Pakistani because I would say Scottish as well. My brother identifies, my older brother who's involved in politics says he's Scottish, right? I say Scottish Pakistani because my dad actually came to Scotland in mid 1980s, right? From Pakistan to marry my mum. So they got married, and obviously dad settled here and that sort of thing after that whole arranged marriage thing. So the fact that my dad is from Pakistan and grew up in Pakistan, right? We can go into the whole discussion about that all if you want to know, but
it's just again, it's just because you glossed over the top of it, just like the whole arranged married thing, right? Yeah. Anyway, carry on. Okay. Right, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No worries. Yeah, so basically, I identify as being Scottish Pakistani because my dad actually grew up in Pakistan, right? That's his background. That's who he is. And for me to not acknowledge that within my experience, even if my mom's been here, you know, 2nd generation, I'm 3rd generation then, so I'm like, you know, whatever. Yeah, so I identify as being Scottish Pakistani. Can't mind what the line I was going to talk about there was now. What were we talking about right before that?
We were talking about, I was just saying about your grandparents would have been pretty raging with the way they were treated and how that hasn't kind of permeated through the generations to then emit from you.
No, it's quite strange. So my aunts and uncles, mum's side, they're actually extremely positive, very, very positive, like Glaswegian folk. Like they're very happy people and things like that. And the whole experience hasn't really been bitter to them because it's how welcoming Scotland is like now and today. I mean, the friendliness, it's there. I just believe that there's more to do.
I would agree.
So, for example, I will tell you, like in terms. So now I'm going to paint you a picture of how stark and surreal the lack of representation is within Scotland. And also, I'll describe my party too, so I can describe where my role in this is. So, Westminster MPs, we've got 59 of them. 100% of them are white, right? So, in Scottish Parliament, 129 MSPs. I think it's 129. But into the entirety of the Parliament, you've got Hamza Yusuf, and then you've got Anas Sarwar. So 2 out of 129. You think about the fact that they're both Pakistani men as well. So if you think about the Indian population, we've got the Bangladeshi, Afro-Caribbean, Chinese, Polish, Czech, Romani, everything. Entirety of Parliament, that's all we've got in terms of diversity. You think about 1,200 councillors in the whole of Scotland. Of them, I believe there's less than 30 ethnic minority. So you're talking about, like, I think there's 1,250 councillors. So you're talking 1,200 councillors against, 1,250. So I've got my phone out now to do the math. Let's see, 30 divided by 1,250 times by 100. So it's about like 2% representation. Mm-hmm. So to put that in about 30, we have 32 local authorities. That's less than one ethnic minority in every single local authority. Mm-hmm. And because of this, you end up in a position where the issues affecting ethnic minorities living within Scotland are never addressed because there's no one there. No one knows anything about it. Yeah. There's no representation. There's no understanding.
Is that why people introduce aldermen?
What's alderman?
An alderman is something like in America, or like, so they'll bring in somebody who is like, you know, on a sort of council basis. So say for talk's sake, you've got like a really high Chinese population in your city, but they are not represented in the council. An alderman is someone who is quite high up in that in the community, and they bring them in to advise on issues that would particularly include that minority.
That sounds quite interesting, actually. I might write that down and get that involved in the.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, I mean, like to put the perspective as to like the representation within our party, the Scottish National Party. Obviously, we're in government. We've obviously so we've been in government for the last 13 years. So we've got 60-something MSPs. Only one of them is from an ethnic minority background. We have about 80% of the seats within Westminster. None of them are from an ethnic minority background. Pakistanis are Asians, like, you know, are the largest demographic within Scotland for ethnic minorities, right? Out of the, I think it's 450 councillors we have out of the 1,200 councillors elected, or SNP. Of those, there are only 3 Asians elected, which are, now we do it, me, my brother, and this guy called Shahid. I make up
this guy called Shahid. It's just this guy. We gave him a phone.
Right.
There's some guy at a bus stop. Like, what? I'm got lasagna in the oven. What do you mean I'm going to go? Oh no.
Probably not the best way to describe a colleague. Councillor Farouk. Councillor Farouk, right?
This guy called.
Right.
Oh my god. Right, carry on.
Right. So yeah, Councillor Farouk, right? I should say this guy called Chad. Chad's amazing. I love him.
I love him too. He's
a
great guy.
Yeah.
He always buys me lunch right when I'm hungry during the meeting.
Good guy. Good guy.
Yeah, good guy. Top lad. So as I was saying, yeah. So in the entirety of our party, there's 4 Asians. There's me, Danish, Shahid, and Hamza. I mean, me as a person, I represent 25% of the representation within the entirety of the Scottish National Party for like of the Asian representation. Me and my family represents half the representation. Half.
That's ridiculous, 50%. Man.
50%.
Ridiculous.
My
God, that is crazy, man. That
50% of the Asian representation. Right. It's
you and your bro.
Me and my bro.
Just represented. That's incredible, man.
It was the same with Flo and Madeline on. They said the same thing. Like it was like the
teachers.
Figures they gave us for teachers. Like
so
the
something like
teachers was very, very similar.
They said something like, out of all the teachers, that it was like 5% of them were anything other than white. Out of all teachers. That is
No, I think it's less than that. It's like
I think
1%,
it's
2%, or whatever. It's like 0.9% or something.
It's like, yeah, it's like, it was like into like the point something for like
Was it?
Yeah.
teachers and kind of high, like I was with like.
But that you think. But then, do you know what's funny, right? You look at the
Why is that?
But you look at the NHS, right? And the
I can describe it as to why that is as well in a bit. Sorry.
right,
Go ahead.
Right, okay, no,
No, go ahead.
no, but you look at the NHS, and a huge part of the workforce are from minorities. A huge part of them. So why is it so different from the NHS than it is to the health? To NHS than it is to
Politics.
Teaching. I was going to say
Teaching and politics.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can describe it right. So basically, it's a conversation. So this is the reason why it's very interesting to get the perspective of ethnic minority people involved in the process.
Okay.
Because, so like I've described there, literally just three of us. So in terms of other ethnic minorities, there's Michelle Campbell, Graham Campbell, there's Eva Brahim, and there's a few others. I think in the entirety of our party, there's 9 people from ethnic minority background. So so teaching specifically, and it's such a weird issue that like you'll hear about, right? So how it works for progression within a school is basically you'll have somebody who's a regular teacher. They might go to like being like a senior type teacher. I think they can get to deputy head, I think, promoted within the school without anybody else getting involved. But I think to become a head teacher, or maybe for deputy head this has happened as well, but to become a head teacher, how it works is basically you get like it's different for different local authorities, but I think I've been described this for Glasgow City. It's basically to do with you get 3 representatives from the local parent teachers association. So they'll be like, from the area. You'll have somebody from the council, like a council officer, and I think you have like a councillor or maybe a couple of councillors. And basically they'll sit there and then they'll interview people and then they'll decide who goes ahead. Is basically what's been happening. I was speaking to a teacher about this who's been involved in politics well for a very long time. And he's saying to basically, is the parent teacher associations very, very often entirely white from the local area. It's the sort of thing that people want to get involved with. Ethnic minorities and things like that. They don't really understand the process. Maybe they're not invited, or maybe they don't know how to engage with it because, second generation, third generation, you don't know about these things of the structure of like, or you don't go there because you don't feel comfortable or whatever, for whatever one of the reasons. Basically, you end up with the heads of the Parent Teachers Association, more than likely white background. So you have 3 representatives there from white background. You get the council officer. Representation within council officers or within the structures is extremely low as well for the processes that have happened. So this is something that's been spoken about by a colleague of mine in the Glasgow City Council in terms of, I think Glasgow as a whole is 5% ethnic minority, 10%, I can't remember, but I think there's like 1%, 2% is only represented within the workforce. So it's really, really low. So it's not representative of the population within the workforce, within senior council officer positions. So the council officer more than likely come from like a white background as well, and the councillors themselves, as I've already described, also. So when you end up in a position where that happens, right, is that you go forward for the to become like the deputy head or become the head teacher. You go forward for the assessment panel, and they'll see like 3 representatives. Say there's like a white male, white female, and a ethnic minority person, say an Indian teacher, whatever. And it's through like sort of like, this is where people talk about unconscious bias and things like that, because nobody's saying that the process is racist. Nobody's saying anybody who's on that board is racist. Nobody's saying anything to do with this is racist. So get that all out of your head. The only reason why we brought up race here is to describe the process that's taking place. Basically, when you are sitting there as a representative looking for people to get involved in a slightly higher position, interviewing people, this is where issues such as like gender and race come into play, because essentially everyone that's there doesn't actually have any experience in terms of who would be the best representative. What they have is their unconscious bias about what they perceive to be the issue, to be a leader or somebody involved or somebody that are comfortable going ahead. So when they see like a white female, they'll be like, oh, okay, white female teacher, kind of works for the profession, things like that, using their unconscious bias. When they see the white male, oh, right, okay, that's interesting. He's a leader. All of a sudden, the simple fact that he's male, right, and white. But they look at the ethnic minority, right, and they don't have a specific affinity to who they are as their background. I mean, when they're asking them questions and things like that, that slight difference in cultural background and things like that has an impact. And you can say, okay, we have this whole massive argument about how much of an impact it actually has, but I'm just asking for the basis of the discussion that we're having. It has like a very small impact. It has somewhat of an impact. It has, even the most ridiculous person would be like, it has somewhat of an impact. that tiny little impact that has gone unchecked has literally haunted the careers of people from an ethnic minority background within education within Scotland for like 10, 15, 20 years, because you end up in a position where you cannot progress any further, because that's the first step to progressing a little bit further within education, to become a deputy head or to become a head teacher. So for example, I've just recently seen on Twitter that Cocob Stewart is going to be attempting to run for the seat in Glasgow Kelvin, where the SNP is having the internal elections and things like that. And I've had the conversation with her. She said to me that she's been passed over for promotions within her work for about 10, 12, 15 years, because they keep telling her she requires extra experience in X background, or she should do this course to maybe get a bit better, or that sort of thing, or she needs to show a little bit more leaderships here and there. I said to me, I've been in education for, I think she was saying on our post that she put up there, for almost 30 years. She says, I've had people go against me for the same job who are 15, 20 years my junior, right, younger than me, and they get the role because apparently they did the interview better, or they interviewed better on the day, or it was, they showed the leadership skills that are required, or they got a better reference here and there. And that tiny little difference there that she's spoken to me about is what's affecting ethnic minority communities across the whole, because it's not being filtered for that bias.
Yeah.
So, that whole process, what I described, that people will start to argue with it. They'll be like, oh, well, what about this? What about that sort of thing. But that's the perspective I've had from teachers. I'm not a teacher myself, right? But being involved in the council, that's what I've been told.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why so many people feel uncomfortable with the profession when they're in it, because they're unable to progress on something that's got nothing to do with their ability to do the job, but their people's perception in terms of who should be, promoted. So that's a very long description on that.
No, I'll be honest, I was thinking that when you were describing the whole process, I was like, none of this, what you've, like, those people you've brought in there, none of those people have got any sort of experience in what it takes to be a teacher. It's like, let's get a lot of non-teachers in to decide who's going to be the head teacher. Well, no, surely it should be within the teaching profession, and then get the best candidate for the job. So like somebody literally who is actually the best candidate, rather than going, let's get all the teachers together. Let's get some of the parents, and we'll bring some councillor in, and bring it. And does the Johnny want to come and sit in as well? And what we'll do is we'll go and get the bus driver on the 62. We'll get him in, and he can decide. No, wait a minute. None of these people are actually teachers. Why are they doing this? Like that's bizarre.
Do you not think Do you not think that if more people knew about how illogical that selection progress is, that maybe it would change a bit more? Because that's just brand new information to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then do you think if more people knew about it, they'd be like, well, wait a second here. I mean, obviously you don't want to go down, like, I'm pretty sure the way the American system they elect like a city dog catcher. Do you know what I mean? They all go and vote, do you know what I mean? Quite literally. I mean, I'm not saying we go down that route, but surely let's have people who know about a profession.
I think as well, though, is it's like, well, like it's getting people to kind of change that 1% of the, like, those kind of to address the, like, it's going to sound silly, but getting people to address their unconscious biases, really, isn't it? And kind of go, well, like, actually, like, question themselves and go, well, is this guy the best, or is this person the best person for the job? And it's strange, isn't it? Because it's something that people we are so preconditioned.
Do you know what? Sorry to cut you off.
I think it's. Sorry, what are you saying?
So I was just going to say that there was actually, I read a post on the Melting Scot page. I've actually got it here in front of me, and the sort of the line in the post was about how the whitewashing of British history has ingrained racism into our society. Although if you take that first bit out of what that post said, what Chris was saying about it being ingrained into society, and it's almost on a subconscious level, but how do you address that? Because if it is that ingrained, you're getting it through the media, you're getting it from your everyday life, from your social interactions, and if kids are getting it at home as well, how do you address that?
Yeah, so basically, see, this is the difference between the perspective I have and other people have. So when I get involved, so it's strange because, like I was saying, I'm one of very, very few people elected into politics from an ethnic minority background, and there's very, very little people involved in the process itself. I mean, I was elected very young, so I was 20 years old. My co-councillors were like 61 and 71 or something like that. I mean, like I was a literal baby, like getting like being elected. But really, not really, because you're a young man, right? You are. I'm able to stand. I stood. I got elected. My elected right. I was in the role. So my perspective has come through obviously the youth parliament and equalities work and that sort of thing. So when I describe these things, I have a very strong understanding because it's the perspective I come from, but then it also interests me a lot to learn about the detail. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when you spoke about there saying if more people knew about the process, they would change it. The point being is there's literally hundreds of people that know about this process in terms of teachers and people involved in council officers, and it is brought up as an issue, but nobody listens because they're like, well, it is a fair process. Tell me how it's not a fair process. And you tell them this, that's not a fair process because you describe it to them like this, and they're like, no, that doesn't happen. And that's the end of the conversation. That's literally the end of the conversation. That if there's a council officer, they say that just like, no, the process makes sense. Nobody's going to overhaul anything that they don't need to overhaul unless there is a substantive movement to overhaul it. And nobody's going to look that far into how do we recruit head teachers within a specific council, because everyone who's involved in that process, who's essentially from not from an ethnic minority background, it benefits them to be in that process because they're like, well, I just kind of become well liked and I'll get into the process. But that's not how things should be. Right, that bias that's afforded to them, it benefits them.
It's not very democratic.
I mean, democratic doesn't work either because at the end of the day, you're the best teachers to teach the students, which is literally. So when people say, no, the process works because the best person will get the job, but quite frankly, no, that's not happening. So we are actually on the same page, people who would defend the system and people who would say that we should improve the system, is that I believe the best person should get the job as well, but I don't believe this is the system that does it. Going back to the question that was said there specifically about, if it's so ingrained in society and so, et cetera, that's actually not the way I actually approach like a lot of these arguments or discussions or trying to facilitate change within councils, is that I feel as if online, Twitter, Instagram, even, on platform, we're creating Melting Scot to an extent. People might talk about these big grandeur sort of like arguments and things like that. They'll say things like, ingrained within society because of the British slave trade and things like that. And yes, I agree with that. I 100% do agree with that. But as somebody who's went through politics for the last 3 years and been involved in advocacy work before then and been involved in the youth politics before then, I found it a lot more easier to just get to the root of the problem and just that isn't looking all the way back there and conscious bias. Deal with the first issue that's in front of you, go slightly further. So when I look at an issue like this, you address the issue for what it is. You look at that and you say, how do we prove that that's an issue? And you need to back it up by facts. I mean, I'll look at that and you'll look at that and you'll be like, well, clearly there's something wrong. But for people involved in the process, you need to put on paper, pen and paper, that this is incorrect. And this work is getting done slowly through different trade unions and teaching trade unions and different council officers and things like that. I don't tend to go for the whole ingrained within society and that sort of aspect, unless you do it through speeches and things. So I mean, it's these sort of issues that I'm trying to address within the council and also address as wider society, which is actually through a different motion I'd actually put through at the same time I put through the anti-racist education motion with my brother. That there's hundreds of issues like this in the council. I mean, I named about 14 of them within my speech when I gave it for. I did a speech in support of the Black Lives Matter movement within North Lanarkshire Council, which a lot of other local authorities did as well. But other local authorities just did it as a hashtag BLM, we stand with you, and just moved on. Right?
By the way, we're not racist.
Exactly. Like, we stand with you. Like you've seen those TikToks where the guy just puts his hand and goes, "This is America," and just that doesn't do nothing for nobody.
No, 100. Yeah.
So I'll say I got the chance to basically
put a black square on Instagram, but so yeah,
exactly right. And the thing that I got to do through this process is basically suddenly the title's on my side, and there's a number of issues I don't like with my council. Right, that's not to do with administration, nothing. It's just to do with that. So I wrote them all on paper. I put them on in my speech, and there was a motion being put put forward by the Deputy Leader of the Administration within North Lanarkshire Council, the Labour Party, and I was seconding it. So I spoke about the fact that within our own equality strategy, black men are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than the general population within North Lanarkshire. Like this is on this is within our equality strategy in North Lanarkshire specifically. But there is not a single program trying to tackle that. And I brought this up during the meeting to do with the equality strategy, where we're having this equality strategy passed. And it says in this paper, 3 times more likely to be unemployed. And I just put my hand up and I said, can somebody in this room tell me what we're doing to tackle this? And then they were just like, yeah, there's equality programs. I said, no, those programs are there to tackle unemployment. I'm asking you, where's the program to tackle unemployment for black men who are 3 times more likely to be affected by this? And there was basically there's just no answer. I spoke about the fact that the equality impact assessments within our committees is something that you need to do when you're putting forward a piece of policy within the council. Never used correctly in ever. Like I'm sitting in this council at 20 years old, 21 years old, with all these other councillors who are in their 50s, right? And agenda point after agenda point goes through, and I'm like, where's the equality impact assessment being done? Is this like, actually I've got a paper here, right? I'll show you what it looks like. It just basically just says, this is just like a random paper. Okay. Where obviously this won't come up in the podcast clearly, right? But basically, it's just that you can just see here. Literally, it just says there, equality impact assessment, and it just says it's just not required, basically. And agenda point after agenda point, it just says it's not required. But it sometimes it's cool, right? This one's, I mean, you might say for this one, this one's to do with winter service policy, right? So clearly, maybe there's not meant to be nothing. Basically, right? So basically, right. For example, I made the point that there's women's employment programs that have happened before, and Asian women and black women are much more likely to be unemployed than the general population as well. And there needs to be some level of intersectionality in supporting people. For example, modern apprenticeships is meant to be an access to a career path that's a lot more difficult to get into than obviously to go towards uni or college for people that's not for. North Lanarkshire Council, I think, is the second largest provider of modern apprenticeships across the whole of Scotland. But basically, in the first 2 years I was a councillor, I think out of the 150 jobs that they gave out, 0 came from an ethnic minority background and 0 came from a disabled background. And in the 3rd year, I think they had 1 ethnic minority person out of 150 jobs. So clearly there's an issue in terms of engaging with the community and that sort of thing. So on the specific point you said about the alderman thing, through the motion that was passed, I got a lot of these things to be put on paper, to be endorsed by the council, that we're now going to look into through an ethnic minority working group that will work alongside community groups from North Lanarkshire Council, and also council officers and councillors. So I have a significant amount of power, and we're going to look into these things. And I think I'm going to be co-chairing it with the Deputy Leader of the Administration. So I'm going to be in a specific power to be able to implement all these changes that I want to look into, that I notice. And these things aren't glamorous. Like, I know I've just went on a rant for about 10 minutes again. But I should probably speak slower. I speak way too fast.
No,
like,
sorry, it's passionate, man. It's passionate. I like it.
Basically, these things that I'm speaking about here, in terms of the teachers and the deputy heads things and all these other stuff I've spoken about, this stuff is very much not glamorous. This stuff does not hit the newspapers. It's not even on page 17 of a random local paper, because nobody cares about it. I care about it, and I'm working towards it, and that's obviously what I'm trying to do within my local authority, and then perhaps further within politics. But the stuff like the anti-racist education, that gets a lot more mileage because it's interesting in decolonizing the curriculum, that sort of thing. And though that stuff is important, but the reason why we need more people involved in politics, or we need more people to be interested in these processes, is because these nuanced issues require for everyone to look at them wherever they may be and to really address them. And I'm doing the best I can within my sort of position of power to do what I can do. But like I said to you, I'm like one of 3 people, like, of literally the entirety of like this population, right? Like, or you look at the Labour Party as well, SNP, I think there's 30, I think, and then Hamza plus Anis. There's 32 people trying to go against this, against the entirety of the structure that's been built up. So when you look at the argument about it's ingrained within society, things like that, I agree with that. That's not the first point I go to. I don't think that's the first root issue we need to deal with. We should deal with the stuff that we can deal with today, here and now, and go towards it, because I think that's a lot more of a pragmatic approach. However, we are not working at a pace that we should be working at if we are actually trying to say that within Scotland we want true race equality. And at the end of the day, there's nobody pushing back on this. There's people who aren't trying to push back on this right now. We're in a very positive place in Scotland. I'm having this conversation here with you guys. You guys are very much like, this is shocking. We should do something about it.
Yeah, very much so.
And I feel as if that's a perspective for a lot of people in the public as well.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't being translated into any real work because it requires us to look at things that have been there for a very long time and change them. And because of that, people don't want to do it because people got to put work in. It's literally just laziness to an aspect. And a lot of times, perhaps it's to do with actually upholding the structures that would actually benefit people as well. So there is that whole, maintaining the, for example, the, what's it called? Systemic racism or the patriarchy or that sort of thing. People don't want to do things that harms themselves as well.
Yeah.
So it is an uphill battle. I did get involved in politics at a very, very young age. But that's my whole life, career, and plan, things like that.
Do you know, I know you said you get involved in politics very young, and that's what I was actually going to ask you about next. So you were elected when you were 20 years old, right? Chris, can I just ask you a question, mate? See, at 20 years old, right, what were you doing?
I had joined the army. I was in the army for about a year.
Right, so see when I was 20, I was singing and playing the guitar. That's what I was doing, right? I had no desire really to get out there and do something that potentially could change a portion of society, right? So the reason I'm mentioning that is because one, I want to know, at what point did you think, do you know what, I'm running in these elections, and then because obviously your age, you were saying you were up against guys that were like well old. Do you know what I mean? Did you ever look and think, why are more young people not standing up here and trying to get elected? And did that not throw you off, like throw your confidence a bit or whatever? No.
No, I mean, so I think there's a few things to play into here. Number one, I got involved when I was about 14 in the youth parliament. I ran for election. I actually lost that election, the first one I ran for. And I tell you, like, that first election I lost taught me more about politics than probably the next 6 years involved in the processes did. Losing teaches you so much. Like, I cannot express to you how much, like those Instagram quotes, you only win or learn. I learned a lot that first time. I was bawling my eyes out and stuff like that, but you learn a lot.
Really?
So I got involved in, so I elected when I was 16, right? And the whole process of getting involved in like learning and youth work as well, like, that kind of teaches you a lot about confidence. So I was involved between 16 and 18. I led like a campaign to do with improving young carer support across the whole of Scotland. So I pick up a lot of skills and things like that through networking as well. I ended up in some random opportunities, which is a whole other conversation in itself. The most weirdest sort of like opportunities I ended up with through just random chance. So when I ended up running for election at 20, so basically, to give context, so I did first year and second year of university. Guess what I studied?
Well, I know what you studied because I've searched you. So
yeah. All right, Chris. What did you? Any reasonable person would say.
I'd say politics, but that's not. Yeah. That's not. What, I know that's not what you studied.
No, I studied mechanical engineering. So the story makes no sense, right? So I did first year and second year of mechanical engineering. I took a year out to work in a finance company, right? So, and then I traveled the world, went to like 6-7 countries, right? And towards the tail end of this year off, working at the company called Prudential, like a FTSE 100 company, I was running for a local council election. So I ran for election during that year, whilst I was on a year off. So when I went back to uni to finish off my 3rd and 4th year, my hardest years in dissertation and all that, also had this whole like full-time role to go with. So did I find it difficult running and things like that? No, I'd got a level of confidence from being involved for quite a while and having all this experience and traveling the world in different programs, plus the support of my parents, things like that, and my dad especially. Also, I didn't tell you guys this, but like on top of the nice hair and the nice beard and all that, my most distinctive feature is actually my height.
I know, you're about 7'8" or something, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm 6'7" actually. So,
I thought I'm 6'4". I thought I was big.
6'4"?
6'4".
Yeah. Oh, you, Chris?
4'3".
Like 5'11".
We're doing all right here, but yeah. So I'm like So I think I looked older. Maybe I grew my beard out a little bit extra at the time. So nobody's ever questioned me about my age. Something that's also very interesting is that nobody's ever. I've never been referred to as like a career politician or anything
That's
like
a
that.
good. That's a good thing, though.
So, yeah, no one's ever said that to me, like ever. I've been asked about it once, twice, maybe. I don't know. People, I think maybe people. But I've never been. I don't know. I think it's to do with my whole like easygoing nature. Like I don't talk as if somebody that I mean, if I never told you I was involved in politics,
I think you're a mechanical engineer.
I think you're a professional beard grower.
Exactly.
Because actually, Joe, it's funny when Chris first showed me a picture, I was like, I tell you what, he's a big handsome boy, isn't he? Anyway, sorry, you were talking before I interrupted.
Yeah. So in terms of the confidence and running things like that, I had the confidence. I mean, a lot of it comes from my dad, like, you know, in terms of encouraging me to get involved in things like that, and had my brother alongside me. But as to why other young people don't run, politics is very, I mean, it looks all flashy and stuff like that when the big debates and stuff like that, but I swear it's very, very tedious and boring in terms of how you get to where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go to branch meetings every single month. And it's in a room filled with like 30, 40 people. And you care very passionately about the community, you care very passionately about politics and the political party and the beliefs and things like that. But the meeting itself is quite boring for somebody who's 16 or 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 or 21 or anyone under their mid 40s, right? Like you go through like a process of a branch report, a treasurer's report. They'll go through a bunch of random other things like that, and it's everything every single month like that. The people in the meeting, nobody's your age. I mean, I was 18 years old, I think, when I first went to my first branch meeting. Next youngest there was another guy who was there about my same age, right? But besides us two, the next person was like 35, and then after those couple people and my MSP as well, who was about mid 30s, I think, at the time. Everyone else was in their 50s, so you don't really relate to anybody in the room at all. I went to the meeting monthly because I found the politics interesting, having been involved in the youth department, things like that. Also, something I picked up on quite quickly as well is that a lot of people don't give old people a lot of time of day. They don't really sit down and really listen to people. I don't know why that is. I mean, I sat in branch meetings and it still confuses me to this day. Like, I don't know. I like listening to people who've got like stories about society and, like, you know, can teach me things that I'll never be able to know firsthand. Listen to a teacher, one of the first branch meetings I went to, who's been involved in the community for about 30 years. She was telling me the stories. Halfway through telling me a story about my old high school that I was really interested in listening to, she tells me, sorry for talking too much. Do you want me to stop? And I'm like, you're literally halfway through a story. She's like, am I not boring you? And I just, my heart broke. She was telling me, because I mean, she's sitting in a branch meeting by herself, like with and it's like she comes here. It's more of a social thing to an extent to some of these older folk who go there, and there's a lot to learn from these people. And I was like, I don't know, like it's whatever. That was a mad emotional tangent there, but I'm very good with people, so it also fitted in really well with the aspect. I'm just gonna. I mean, we're getting late and stuff like that, but I'm enjoying the conversation and things, so we can.
Listen. I was actually, what I was going to say to you was just before we finish up.
We can keep going. I'm fine as well, but
no, because I've only got kind of one more thing I was really wanting to talk about. Was basically, you're obviously still incredibly young, right?
Yeah.
And you're obviously a very motivated young man. So I'm kind of thinking that you're not just going to be a councillor, right? So have you got aspirations to fucking run the country at some point? Nicola got to watch her back.
No, no, that's my party leader, man. She's amazing, man.
Good answer.
Well played. Well played,
Sarah. Just thought I'd throw the marbles at the floor there, just see what happened.
I mean, if I could only aspire to be even half as good as Nicholas, I mean, like, honestly, but it's interesting because a lot of people who are young who get involved in politics, or people say to them, "Oh, you want to be the Prime Minister or First Minister one day, whatever." What I found in the process, after I left university and things like that as well, is like life's just happening, and there are issues at every single level of our society, and whatever level you're working on, you should work at that and see what's in front of you. Use your hands and just kind of tackle what there is. So obviously, I'm in a local authority level. I'm working within North Lanarkshire Council. There's a number of issues I want to address that we went through already. I'm trying to address these, do the best that I can, and make sure that I can help benefit the community in the way that I see fit. And however long that takes, I mean, I'm unbothered by it. I mean, if I was motivated by money, I would have stayed at that finance company. I mean, I swear to you, they were paying me way too much money. Like,
what,
way
you got
too
a
much.
telephone number?
Politics does not pay well. Like, honestly, and there's a lot of scrutiny on you as a person, as an individual, online, within the community. People get in touch with you. There's a lot of responsibility on your hands. But I at this juncture in my very early sort of political in my life, I still feel a responsibility that I am a capable young man and I'm able to do something in society, and I want to benefit that. So work at the level I'm working at. In terms of progression, things like that, something that you talk about on like a council level, local authority level, is that councillors do what they do, and they are actually at the forefront of delivering all these services. Parliament is what Parliament is in terms of Holyrood is what it is, and Westminster is what it is. There isn't actually a progression between one to the other because they are completely different roles. So in terms of getting involved in politics and would I ever go to Parliament, I wouldn't see that as a progression. I would see that as, you know, a different role I'd be involved with. Would I like to go there one day? Perhaps, but I'm quite comfortable where I'm at right now. But I would, the perspective that I have is that basically I want to make a change to my society, and whatever avenue I can do that, I would like to do that. So yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't rule out Parliament at all. And I hope to do better for my community as I progress within my life. However, it's not for me to basically get to a point like, you know, Boris Johnson. You look at him 15 years ago, people be like, oh, he's trying to become prime minister, whatever, and you finally got there and you're like, yes, he achieved it. I'm not trying to be first minister. I'm not trying to progress in seniority. I'm just trying to do the best I can, and hopefully through my work and my progress, I can actually achieve that change, you know.
Brilliant,
and that's where the Melting Scot comes in as well. You know, it's, I want more people to get involved, and I want to encourage more people. It's not for the fame, definitely not for the fortune. So, you know, I just want to be at a point in my life that, you know, I'll speak to Anna Server about this. Sorry, I extended the answer a wee bit. I'll speak to Anna Server about this MSP. I don't know if I told you this. I had a whole documentary about me.
Yeah, I watched it.
Stuff like that. Yeah,
I watched it.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was on the Server was speaking. He was saying basically he grew up in Scotland, things like that, and he actually envisions that the world may be a darker place than it is. The world might be a darker place for his kids than it was for him, and that scares the life out of him. And that's the exact same perspective that I have, is that I feel a moral responsibility on me to ensure that the children that will come after me will have a better experience in this country than I will. And that I feel that as a duty upon me, that I don't really care about the money or anything else, is that there's some things in life which are worth the sacrifice and the hardship. And that's why I'm involved in politics, because I very much cannot shake that off of my moral conscience. So
I think that's admirable, man. That is admirable, and I think I think nowadays more than ever it's a rare outlook to have. I think people nowadays are so concerned with themselves rather than the bettering their community and bettering the experience of the next generation. So I think very much so that's something that is definitely that other people should aspire to, 100%.
Cool. Thank you.
So I think we'll call it a night there, gentlemen, because I need to get some beauty sleep, evidently. Junaid needs to wash and condition that barnet of his, so... but listen, thanks very much for coming on and talking to us. I've learned a hell of a lot, and I don't think this will be the last time you're on. I think I think there's probably a part two that has been beckoned.
I think we could probably do about 3 or 4 parts and we stay with it.
Well, just totally, man. Like it's as I said, it's been very educational. So I'm just going to sign off just now, guys. So thanks very much for listening, folks. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons.